Welcome to another episode of the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. I'm Zach Kaufman here with Ryan D'Amico.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
We are back. Yeah, we're back here. Zach, and one thing that I like that we've done a lot more, probably the last, maybe the last month or so, is like before we hop on the air, we have like a good 30 to 40 minute discussion just about life and about sports and whatever, and kind of just gets things going. I think it makes for a better show. It gets us a little fired up and gets the juices flowing a little bit. So I think that's really helped us. And how's things going for you, man?
I'm feeling good. I agree. I like our conversations before, getting prepped here, talk a little bit about football, a little bit about completely off-topic stuff, and gets me all set to go here.
Exactly. We talked about you talk about sports and talk about random stuff. Our topics range from all the way from beyond. What's the guy's name? What is it?
Biombo.
Bismack Biombo to chocolate covered pretzels. So our discussions definitely it's a very wide range. So Zach's definitely right about that. So look, man, no college football. Obviously, we're in that kind of break now. Before the bowl season starts, which will be starting here pretty soon with some of the lower end bowl games, and then obviously working your way up to the two national semifinals on New Year's Day. So the next episode or two, we'll dive into some bowl recaps. But as for this week's episode, we're actually going to skip college football because it was like the third or fourth most lopsided victory in Heisman Trophy history. So, I mean, it wasn't obviously a surprise. So I didn't think we needed to really spend a lot of time talking about that. I think that's just an award he deserved. And a lot of people break his balls because of his shenanigans and the whole crotch grabbing thing at Kansas and planting a flag at Ohio State. He's a kid at the end of the day. I mean, Zach, you and I did some dumb shit when we were 19 or 20 years old. So, I mean,
very true.
It is what it is, So, tip of the hat to Baker Mayfield. That was the only thing that happened in college football. Real quick there, Zach, we can spend maybe 2 to 3 minutes or however long talking about this. This question just kind of came to mind. I'm interested to hear your perspective. We've obviously told the listeners a lot, and we talk about it a lot on the show, how we really like the NFL draft and kind of, projecting kind of where these players are going to go. And I think Baker Mayfield's a very interesting prospect. I've heard a lot of things from this guy could go first round or this guy could go fourth round. So I'm interested to see, one, do you think he'll continue to play quarterback? Is that a definite in your mind? And where, if you were a GM, where would you rank him? I'll start. Yes, I think he'll play quarterback. If I was a GM, I would take a flyer on Baker Mayfield in probably the third or fourth round, depending on how high or how high I was on him. If I was higher than some people, I probably would snatch him the third. If I was just kind of blasé on him and we needed a quarterback, I would wait and see if he hung around to the fourth round. But I don't see a star when I look at Baker Mayfield in the NFL. I know a lot of people make these comparisons with Russell Westbrook. That guy did it again. I always say Russell Westbrook when I want to say Russell Wilson. It's crazy. They use the comparison of Baker Mayfield to Russell Wilson, but I just don't see it. I mean, they use it because of the same size and the playmaking ability, kind of backyard football kind of stuff. But Russell Wilson is such a special player, and there's one reason why there's only one Russell Wilson in the NFL, because that kind of style just doesn't work for hardly anyone. The only player it's working for right now is Russell Wilson. So I don't think, one, Baker Mayfield's small. If he needs to stand in the pocket, that's going to be pretty difficult. The only quarterback that I can think of that has success that's pretty short is Drew Brees. And he's a Hall of Fame player, so that's obviously an exception to every rule there. I just don't see it with him, man. I mean, he has a nice arm, but he's not fast. He reminds me of Manziel. He can just throw the ball better because he relies on his playmaking ability in college, kind of the backyard, run around, draw plays in the dirt, and make stuff happen kind of thing. But I just don't see it for him, man. So if he goes in the first round, good luck to him. But I just don't see him as a first-round talent. What do you think?
I know we've discussed before how I don't watch a lot of college football, so I don't base it off of what I've seen as much. But there's another podcast I really love their draft insights. I know last year's draft, they were incredibly accurate. That was the first time I really started paying attention to their insights and what they had to say. It's called the Dynasty Nerds Fantasy Football Podcast. And one of the guys on that, he's a huge Cleveland Browns fan, which you don't see a whole lot, but he was really high on Baker Mayfield, hoping the Browns can draft him. So I'm actually intrigued just based off of those guys because they've had very good insights in the past. I know last year they were very high on Kareem Hunt and Dalvin Cook before a lot of other people were as excited about those guys. They were down on someone like Mike Williams, who didn't really have a good season, and John Ross. So early on, from my experience with them, they've really known what they're talking about. And I've been very, very impressed with what they had to say from last year. So I'm very intrigued as things move forward to see what they think as they see more film from him and they go more in depth. So it's hard to say off of my own knowledge and being able to watch him play a little bit, but that's what I go to. I go to some of the experts that are more knowledgeable than me, and it'll be interesting to see. I see him as more of a Tim Tebow type talent where, like you were saying, the third or fourth round, I can't imagine he lasts there. I think he has the upside that someone's going to take a chance on him in the first or second round. I think he's still probably at best going to be the third quarterback taken behind Sam Darnold and Josh Rosen. They still seem like they're the top two, but he could be intriguing with another more athletic quarterback like a Lamar Jackson, kind of in that second round, maybe low first round pick. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm very curious to see as he gets to the combine and hear what some of the other high-end people think about him moving forward. But it's very hard to say for me right now.
Yeah, and, as far as the combine goes, he's not going to wow a lot of people at the combine. Like I mentioned, he's not a very fast player. He's going to run, I think, somewhere in the five range, maybe a little higher than that. That's what some people are saying. So he's not going to blow you away there. As far as the second or third round, or the third or fourth round, I don't think it'll last that long either. That's just kind of where I would probably have drafted him if I needed him. But I agree with you, Zach. He'll probably go first or second round for sure. He's definitely one of the more interesting, prospects that'll be coming out of college and putting their name in the NFL draft hat. So definitely a guy to keep, an eye on. And it's going to be interesting come late April, early May when the draft gets underway. So, but before the draft happens, Zach, we need to finish with this NFL season that we're currently going on. So why don't you go ahead like you always do and spearhead our NFL talk?
Like we talked about last week, there were a lot of good games on the schedule for this week, and they definitely lived up to the hype. So we have plenty to talk about here, and we will start with the first game, the Thursday night game, New Orleans Saints versus Atlanta Falcons. And we talked a little bit about this pre-show. It affected my fantasy team. I had Alvin Kamara on one of my teams where he went out in the first quarter there with an injury. The Saints in a tight game, they weren't quite able to pull away with the win and ended up they were up 17-10 in the third quarter before the Falcons had a Mohamed Sanu touchdown to tie the game 17-17, and then with just under 4 minutes left, they had a 52-yard field goal from Matt Bryant to put them up for good with a big 20-17 win there. On the Saints side of the ball, Mark Ingram was all right. He had 49 yards on the ground. He also contributed 43 yards in the passing game. Michael Thomas had a monster game, 117 yards and a touchdown there. And then on the Falcons side, they had Julio Jones with 98 yards, and then Mohamed Sanu with that game-tying touchdown to go with 83 yards, as well as Devonta Freeman, 91 yards and a touchdown on the ground. So some big moments from the top players on each of those teams, kind of fulfilling what they do. But the Falcons able to pick up a big win here and move to 8-5, and they're still hanging on quite well to that wild card spot.
Yeah, Zach, they are. And look, actually, if Atlanta wins out, they'll actually win this division. They actually control their own destiny. So here we are with 3 weeks left, and if Atlanta can somehow figure out a way to win all three of those games, look, they win the division. They bump the Saints and the Panthers, into those wild card spots. So as far as the dynamics of this game, obviously, as an Eagles fan, I was paying some pretty close attention to this game just because I wanted the Saints to lose and give the Eagles a little bit more breathing room, which they ultimately did. And this was a very non-Saints game as far as this year has gone. And obviously a lot of that's with Kamara going out because he was a guy that they had featured so much, but they just couldn't get the running game going. I mean, Mark Ingram only rushes for 49 yards, doesn't give you much there. They don't rush for 100 yards as a team for the first time since, I want to say it was like week 3 or 4, they were saying. And then Atlanta turns the ball over 3 times. Matt Ryan has 3 terrible interceptions, 1 down in the red zone, yet they still find a way to win. And there was a lot of bonehead plays on each side of this game, and neither team seemed to want to win. And, with Matt Ryan's interceptions and Sean Payton arguing with officials and, the Saints making a field goal as time runs out in the first half, but they get called for a penalty, but because it's as time expires, the half's over, they don't get to retry it. And then Breeze throws a touchdown or interception when they're inside the red zone as they're, having the chance to tie the game or ultimately win it. So it's just a very strange Thursday night game, and Thursday night games do tend to get kind of weird at times, and this one was no different. So going to be interesting to see how these teams respond after this game. Obviously, Atlanta with some momentum here. Like I said, they control their own destiny, Zach. But it's going to be interesting to see how a team like the Saints bounce back. They have a nice matchup this weekend, home against the Jets, but they need to keep their foot on the gas, too, to try and win this division.
I think the Saints will bounce back fine. They're a team I've liked throughout the season. We've talked about before how their defense has improved, and they weren't terrible in that game. And I expect Drew Brees to be fine. Like I said at the beginning, their star players kind of did what they needed them to do. Mark Ingram had a little bit of a down game for getting the majority of the carries throughout the game. But I think they'll still be fine. They're sitting a game ahead of the Falcons, like you mentioned earlier, and they're now tied with the Carolina Panthers there at the top of the division. So the Carolina Panthers is actually where we're going next. They pulled out an important win against the Minnesota Vikings, 2 teams sitting towards the top of the NFC, just behind the Philadelphia Eagles. The Vikings dropped down to 10-3. And then the Panthers move up to 9-4 after winning 31-24 in this game. And the big thing that stood out to me, the biggest struggle for the Panthers throughout this year has been not being able to get a running game going. And Jonathan Stewart with a takeover game. He only had 16 carries, but 103 yards and 3 touchdowns. And that's what really carried them. The receiving game worked well for Minnesota. They had 105 yards from Adam Thielen and a touchdown. They had a touchdown from Kyle Rudolph, who's become incredibly steady for them at the tight end position. It just seems like every week, 40 to 60 yards and a touchdown for him. Stephon Diggs also contributed 64 yards. So both teams playing solid there. And Carolina able to pull away. It was 24-24 before they scored within the last 2 minutes. Another Jonathan Stewart touchdown on that one to put them ahead. So if they can get contribution like that from the running game, this is one of the top teams there in the NFC, and they can really make a run if they're playing like this. It would be interesting to see, but they were clearly able to beat a very good Vikings team that's impressed me throughout the year.
Yeah, that's a big win for Carolina. I mean, it really is. I haven't been as high on Carolina this year as a lot of people, and I'm still really not high on them for that matter. I don't think this is a team that can get to the Super Bowl. I really don't. I just don't think Cam is playing well enough to get to the Super Bowl. I mean, look, this team put up 31 points and beat the second seed in the NFC, and Cam Newton only threw for 137 yards, a touchdown, and a potentially costly interception late in that fourth quarter that could have really spun things out of control. Fortunate for him, he makes a big run late to make up for it, and they ultimately win the game. But I'm still not sold on Carolina, but this is the way they have to do it. They need to run the ball, rely on the defense to keep them around and win close ball games, because I just don't see the Panthers as a team that's going to blow many people out. But Zach, one thing I did want to say is, if you remember going back to last week's episode, do you remember what I said about the Vikings and what I said about Case Keenum? They hadn't had to come from behind in a long time. And guess what? This week they had to come from behind and they lost. So I think it's pretty clear that this team has to get a lead, get out to a lead early, let Case Keenum kind of just manage the game back there and, make some easy throws, run the ball some, and let the defense go to work. That's the way Minnesota has to win. I mean, if we get into the playoffs, Zach, and I mean, they get behind some teams, especially if they get behind some teams on the road, I think it could be a struggle for them. I really do. So Minnesota's still a good team. I don't want to take anything away from them, but I think it's just imperative for them to get the lead and try to hang on to it with that defense. This team is not built to come from behind.
I still continue to agree with you for the most part that they're not built that way. Case Keenum's still a solid quarterback. He's been like that throughout the year, and they've still, even with this loss, they're sitting at 10-3. It's been working for them the most part. If they can get through some of these teams, this was a close game. They definitely could have won. This would be a winnable game in the playoffs for them. If they can get that lead at any point, they're a good team, and they're tough to come back against on the other side of that.
Last thing I'll say as far as this game goes is they have a very winnable game this weekend at home against the Bengals. I'm pretty sure they're a double-digit favorite. Barring something crazy, you would expect them to win that game. The Bengals are a mess. But next week, the following week, they face the Packers, which I think is it's either a 4 o'clock game or it's a Sunday night game. And that game is at Lambeau. So it's a Sunday night game. It's a Saturday night game. 8:30 Saturday night in Lambeau, with the potential of Aaron Rodgers being back, Zach, and possibly throwing a corkscrew or throwing a wrench, or whatever the term is, throwing a wrench into the plans of the Vikings. So, I mean, they're sitting Sunday morning, they had the possibility of being the number 1 seed and sitting pretty to possibly get the number 1 seed and get home field throughout the playoffs, to where they're at now. If they lose that game to the Packers, there's a possibility they could not even get a first-round bye. So that game and the health of Aaron Rodgers is critical.
It'll be interesting to see. I still don't think there's a whole lot for the Vikings to be that worried about. They're sitting at 10-3. The Packers are still fighting for their lives even to make it into the wild card spot. And I think the Vikings will be fine even if they don't end up with the first-round bye. They still have a very good team. We've talked about the defense repeatedly. They have some good offensive weapons there. So it does make it tougher, giving them a chance to take a loss against a lesser team. But I think they'll still be good either way, whether they're the 2 or 3 seed in the NFC. And bringing that up, that's actually one of the games we're moving to next. We'll touch on 2 games here briefly.
I can't wait to talk about this game.
They have similar implications here, but the Packers took a 27-21 overtime win against a winless Cleveland Browns team. So Brett Hundley doing everything he can, throwing 3 interceptions this game to keep the Packers in that playoff hunt. They're sitting at 7-6. They also are tied with another team in that division who barely pulled out a win at the end of the game. The Detroit Lions had a field goal with 20 seconds left to beat the Buccaneers 24-21. Both those teams are sitting at 7-6, a game out of the wild card spot in the playoffs. Detroit does not have the advantage of the Green Bay Packers where they could have Aaron Rodgers back. It's a tough spot for both of them to have hope for the playoffs. What are your thoughts on these two teams here?
Yeah, these teams are interesting. Look, the Lions are fortunate enough that they got out of Tampa with a win. I mean, they really fucked around and tried giving that game away, really. I mean, at one point in that game, they're up 21-7 going into the fourth quarter, and they just lollygag around and let Tampa Bay come back and tie it, and they have to win it on a 46-yard Matt Prater field goal with 25 seconds left. So let's just remember about that with Detroit. I mean, this team is just not – sorry, like they're just not playoff material. I just don't buy them getting in. Now, look, they do have a pretty favorable schedule the rest of the way with the Bears this week, at the Bengals the following week, and then they finish at home on New Year's Eve against the Packers, which could be a very pivotal game. We'll see how this pans out, but I just can't buy and can't get too excited about the Lions. Now, the Packers are another story because I was fully expecting them to lose that game. I mean, they're down 21-7 going into the fourth quarter. Kaiser's lighting them up. Offense can't do anything in Cleveland, dreary Cleveland, where this is their Super Bowl. They're trying to get that first win and not go winless this year. And the Browns are the Browns, and they do what they do best, and they screw around. And the game goes to overtime. Hundley throws a touchdown with 17 seconds left. It goes to overtime, and DeShone Kaiser throws an absolutely just ridiculous throw that's like a pop fly to shallow center field, and it gets picked off by Green Bay, and they're set up and ultimately score a touchdown to win. So if they had lost that game, Green Bay, obviously they're done.
Yeah.
They win it, now you're asking yourself, okay, you're only one game back. With a very big game this week, you're going to Carolina. And then you have the Vikings the following week, and then you're at the Lions. There's been no definite word if Aaron Rodgers is coming back. Like he's come out and said he wants to come back. Clay Matthews has come out and said he can play. He's good to go. But the doctors and Mike McCarthy haven't cleared him yet. And I mean, tomorrow's the day. Like Wednesday is when these guys get back to practice. So, I mean, we'll find out tomorrow if he's going to be a go. It all comes down to him. I mean, if he's not in there and Brett Hundley's playing, I mean, you're not going to go to Carolina and win. You might not win at home against the Vikings, and then that Lions game then at the end of the year is pointless anyway. So it's just hinging on Aaron Rodgers. I mean, you would agree with that, right? I mean,
100%. I personally don't see either of these teams making the playoffs. I think
agreed.
They're playing it too close to 500. It's been unfortunate for the Packers. Most of that's due to Aaron Rodgers and his injury. The Lions, just like you said, they're not a real playoff team. They can't get anything from their running game. They had a little hope last week with Tion Green doing some good things, and then he came out 15 yards rushing this game. Didn't really contribute much. Theo Riddick was their leading rusher with less than 3 yards per carry. They don't have a running game. They're not a real legit playoff contender. Whereas the Packers certainly are if Aaron Rodgers can come back. And that can be a dangerous team as a wild card team playing one of the better teams record-wise. But with Aaron Rodgers there, that's something to watch out for. But I just don't see him making that run. I think it's going to be tough. They have a tough schedule there ahead of them with three teams with winning records that you went through there. I don't see either of these teams making the playoffs.
I agree. I don't think either one gets in. I don't think it's much going to matter if Rodgers comes back or not. One thing people and the national media doesn't talk about is how awful that Green Bay secondary is and pass defense is. They're very bad. And obviously Rodgers makes up for that somewhat, but I just don't see it at the end of the day of either of these two teams getting into the playoffs. I think they're both going to be on the outside looking in and looking towards next year. I agree with you.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll move. It is impressive that division has three teams with a winning record fighting for a playoff spot. And we're actually going to move to another similar division, but they have specifically two teams at the top really battling out. Kansas City pulled out a win against the Oakland Raiders this week. The Raiders were right in it. They were sitting at 6-6 prior to this game. Kansas City was struggling. 26-15, the Chiefs won, which I kind of expected. The Raiders have just not been that impressive. And even that score that looks closer at 26-15, it was 26-0 at one point in the third quarter before the Raiders scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. So the Raiders really didn't give much competition there. I haven't thought they had a chance at the playoffs for a while, and they're continuing to prove that. On the Chiefs side of the ball, it was exciting to see Kareem Hunt finally bounce back. The number one contributor, they gave him real carries. They've had so many games recently. They've given him even less than 10 carries in at least one game. They have not been feeding him the ball much, but he had 25 carries this game. Bounces back with 116 yards and a touchdown. That's huge for this Chiefs team. They really need him. Tyreek Hill had 75 yards. Travis Kelce, 74. They've both been so consistent, and they even got 72 yards from Albert Wilson, even though Alex Smith didn't throw a touchdown at all this game. But this is what they need here if they're going to hang on to that division lead.
Yeah, first the Raiders. I mean, talk about a team that just did not live up to expectations at all whatsoever. Not even close. Like, not even from the get-go. I mean, this is a team that you and I, Zach, look, we don't hide things around here, and a lot of people like to, hide around with their predictions and try to sweep them under the rug. I'm not that type of person. Look, I picked the Raiders to go to the AFC Championship game this year, and I look like an idiot. But look, at the end of the day, every prediction's not going to come right. That's why they're predictions. And if all my predictions came right, I'd be a multimillionaire. But I'm not, so it is what it is. But, I mean, this team has just really, really struggled. I mean, Derek Carr has just not lived up to expectations this year whatsoever. They've had some injuries. The defense hadn't had an interception until like week 11 or 12, which is embarrassing. So they just had a lot of things just not going their way this year. And we're fortunate enough. And, oh, by the way, Oakland, things weren't going your way. You were struggling, but at the same time, the rest of your division was struggling. So you still had a chance to try to right the ship. And you come out and play an absolutely awful game this weekend. They look like they quit. They look like they didn't even want to be there. With everything to play for, they look like they would have rather been on, down in Miami Beach somewhere catching some rays or something, because it was really pathetic, the effort that they had. And you're right, Zach. You hit the nail right on the head. The final score is 26-15. This final score should have probably been 40-3. It was that the game was not that close at all. So, but on the other side, you tip your hat to Kansas City. Look, they get a much needed win, and try to right the ship there after all them losses in a row. They finally get back on the winning track. And look, they weren't playing from behind. I mean, a lot of these games lately they had been playing from behind, which kind of gets to your point of them not feeding Kareem Hunt the ball. So as you know, and as I know, especially when Andy Reid gets behind, he's not going to run the ball. So that kind of is what it is there. So, and it sets up an interesting matchup this week for Kansas City with San Diego, a team I'm sure we'll talk about, or San Diego. I've done that all year, and I'll probably continue to do it even to next year. Los Angeles, the Chargers. I should just say the name, the Chargers. Forget the city. I'm just going to say the Chargers. It
feels so natural. I know
it does.
You're struggling.
We've been saying it since we were kids.
Yeah, since this is our first year there, I feel like every time I have to think it through and figure out, are they LA? Are they San Diego?
Exactly.
With this team.
Exactly. So, sets up a big matchup this week. Kansas City's a weird team because, like, you look at them and they have talent. I mean, they have talent kind of all around, both sides of the ball. They have some nice pieces. They had, had just been in a funk there for a while. So they're a team that I'm really focusing on going down the stretch here to see how they close out the season and see if they can, wrap things up and get into the playoffs.
And they have their next game, like you said, against the Chargers, who picked up a win this past week against the Redskins. We've said plenty about how disappointing the Redskins are this year, how mediocre they are. They continue to not do a whole lot. They were down at 1 point 30-6 in this game before getting a late touchdown to make it 30-13. The Chargers moved to 7-6. same exact record as the Chiefs, and now they're playing each other this week for the division lead. So that's one of the top games to keep an eye on here. Both teams have looked fantastic at different points, and both teams have looked miserable at other points. The Chargers specifically at the start of the year, the Chiefs the 4 weeks prior to this game against the Raiders. So I'll be very excited to see how both of these teams come out and look against each other. The Chargers in this game, huge passing stats from Tyrell Williams, 132 yards and a touchdown on only 4 catches, averaging 33 yards per catch. And then Keenan Allen with 111 yards. He's just been a beast lately. Yep. And then Hunter Henry had 50 yards and added a touchdown there as well. Those were definitely the standout players. Melvin Gordon had 78 yards on the ground plus a touchdown. The Redskins' leading receiver, Jamison Crowder and Josh Doxson, were tied at 34 yards. That just combined, they were behind both of the top receivers of the Chargers there. They're not picking up wins that way. Kirk Cousins, just an all-right game there for him. Not a whole lot to see in this game. And one of the touchdowns the Redskins did get was when the Chargers put in their backup quarterback, Kellen Clemens, and he threw a pick six.
Exactly. Yeah, this game, it's pretty evident that the Redskins have packed things in. That goes to show you this game. I mean, they're one of their safeties, DJ Swearinger, came out and said, "I'm not surprised we played this way. Practice was terrible this week." So, and when you have guys saying that, it's pretty clear that your season's done and guys just want to get onto the golf course and spend time with their families and stuff like that. So, Redskins obviously packed it in. The Chargers, man, this was my team. This was my team at the beginning of the year that I thought was really going to surprise some people. And I looked like an idiot when they started out 0-4, but they are rolling now, Zach, and could win this division, can get into the playoffs. And look, if you're Mike Tomlin, if you're Bill Belichick, if you're, what's the guy for the Jacksonville's head coach? I forget his name off the top of my head. Marone, right? Doug Marone. If you're Doug Marone, I mean, you don't want to play the Chargers. I mean, they will tell you that right now. We do not want to see LA in the playoffs. They don't want to see it. This team is absolutely on a roll. And everyone's talking about Rivers and Gordon and Keenan Allen, who's been fantastic. And rightfully so. They're putting up great numbers. But I want to talk about the defense, dude. The defensive side of the ball has been really carrying this team since about middle of October. Since October 15th. Listen to the numbers that the points that the defense has given up each game since the middle of October. Okay, 16, 0, 21, 20, 24, 6, 10, and 13. They keep playing defense like that with Rivers and his whole crew of merry men. They're going to be extremely tough to beat in the playoffs. So I think the Chargers win on Saturday. It's a Saturday night game, actually. There's 2 Saturday games this weekend. Saturday night game. I know it's in Kansas City. I don't really give a shit. I'm riding with the Chargers, and I'm sticking with my team here, and I'm riding them until the wheels fall off. I think they're going to go in to Arrowhead and knock off the Chiefs.
I'm going to continue betting against you on this one. I like the Chiefs most.
What do they got to do? What do they got to do, Zach? What do they got to do to get your respect?
They've got to beat the Chiefs.
Okay, so if they win this weekend, you come to my side.
Yes. Then huge. I do like them. I just still think the Chiefs are a better team. I think they are better than quite a lot of the teams in the wild card race and in the lead for the wild card right now in the AFC. But I still like that Chiefs team better than the Chargers right now. I think they'll finish slightly ahead. But I'll be impressed if the Chargers come out and pull a win out against this Chiefs team in Kansas City.
All right, man. All right. Well, next week when we do our show, I hope you have your Phillip Rivers jersey on because I'm telling you, they're going to knock the Chiefs off.
I'll believe it when I see it, my man.
Gotcha.
All right, we'll move on to our next game here. And we'll start to get into the NFC a little bit more with the Eagles-Rams game first here. And this is a game, the Eagles pulled it out. They won 43-35. Really, the score was 37-35. It's kind of fluky touchdown there at the end of the game to make it 43-35. But the big news here after a huge game, 4 touchdowns thrown by Carson Wentz, he is out for the year with an ACL injury, which really hurts this Eagles team. And I'll pass it off to you for your thoughts, because I know you'll have a lot more than me. I wasn't watching this game specifically. I was watching the score to see how the Eagles did. But even as a Cowboys fan, I have a huge respect for Carson Wentz. He has been fantastic this entire season. And I do feel disappointment. I would never wish injury on anyone. And I do genuinely feel disappointment that he had to experience this. I love more than almost anything to see the Eagles lose, but not this way. I would have been happy to see them lose with Carson Wentz at full strength in the playoffs. But it's frustrating to see a talented player like this that's taken such a huge step forward in his second season and just impressed throughout the season to go down with a huge injury like this.
Yeah, much respect to you too, man, for your view on the situation, especially as a Cowboys fan. I saw some people on social media making a joke about it and everything. And look, I mean, it is what it is. Injuries are part of the game, but this one really hurts. I sent out a tweet yesterday that said, I think I like Carson Wentz the person more than I like Carson Wentz the player. Now, granted, I don't know him, but just from interviews and social media and stuff like that, and just seeing the kind of person that he is, that he allows us to see. I mean, this guy is A+ across the board. And for this to happen to him, I mean, he threw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns in 3 quarters. He didn't play the entire fourth quarter. What would those numbers have been had he played that whole game? What 450 yards and 5 touchdowns maybe? I mean, that's ridiculous. He was going to be the MVP of the league. I mean, that goes without saying. Brady's been struggling here lately. Russell Wilson had a bad game yesterday. He was going to be the MVP, and he tears his ACL and he goes down. And the Eagles, look, I'm not saying this just because I'm an Eagles fan or being a homer, but I truly believe with Carson Wentz, they were the best team in football. I think they were better than the Steelers. I think as a team, overall team I'm talking about, and I think they were better than the Patriots. I really believe that. I think the defense is better, which is kind of the deciding factor between all three of those teams. Good offenses across the board, but I thought the Eagles' defense is a little better. And it's just – it is what it is. We're Eagles fans, and we kind of almost expect these things to happen. So it sucks, but I've experienced it multiple times in my life. So I'm kind of numb to the situation. But this year is a little different because it really did feel – the year did feel special. I mean, for the beginning of the year, man, I was on the fence, and I didn't want to get too high. I just wanted to ride it out week by week. For the last 3 weeks or so, man, I jumped off the deep end and I went in, and I truly thought this team could win the Super Bowl. I didn't want to get my hopes too high, but I don't know how I couldn't, because this team was rolling, and they get a big win in LA against the Chargers, and looks like they're going to get home field advantage now. They have a really easy schedule the rest of the way. I mean, they play at the Giants on Sunday, at home against the Raiders on Christmas, and then finish up with the Cowboys at home. Who knows if that game's even going to mean anything for the Eagles. So, I mean, there's still, as far as the outlook now for this team, Zach, and I'd be interested to get your perspective on it as a pretty knowledgeable football fan. I think this team can be okay. Do I think this team – I like to put it this way. Do I think this team can get to the Super Bowl? Yeah, absolutely. I think they have the pieces and the team around them to get to the Super Bowl. And I was talking to some friends last night. Do I think they're going to get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl? Nah. Without Carson Wentz, I can't do it. I can't make that final jump into saying this team can get to the Super Bowl. But they do have the pieces around Nick Foles. And Nick Foles is going to step in, and he's a very capable backup. He showed that on Sunday, Zach. I know you said you didn't watch the game. You were just checking out the score. You're doing some other things. But he made some throws in the fourth quarter that were really impressive. I mean, he hangs into the pocket. He has a big arm. He's not as mobile as Carson Wentz, but he's been here before. and he has a handful of starts in this league. And I think the pieces that they have around him, pretty good offensive line, good playmakers on the outside. Zach Ertz didn't even play on Sunday. He'll be back. And the defense, look, they struggled a little bit on Sunday against the highest scoring team in football. But when they needed to make a play late, they made a play. So I think they just got to continue to do what they do. Run the ball successfully. They're the second best run team in football, and stop the run. They're the best team defensively at stopping the run. You do them things, anything's possible. Just have Nick Foles just be average. If Nick Foles is an average quarterback, so a little bit above average, there's no reason this team can't get to the Super Bowl. So interesting to see what you have to say about the Eagles and where they go from here, man.
I think they're for the situation with losing Carson Wentz, they're in a good situation where Nick Foles has started for the Eagles before. He's had success as a starter before. Like you said, he came in, he threw 6 for 10. He completed 6 for 10 of his passes. Didn't get a lot of chance, but he has a good schedule set up, especially coming up here against the Giants, where he can kind of get used to playing with this team, to being the starting quarterback. He's got 3 games to do it, to get him set for the playoffs. And then if they have that bye, they have that extra week to make adjustments, tweak their team, whatever they need to do to adjust to Nick Foles as the starting quarterback. And I'm looking through, the NFC has good depth when it comes to good teams, but I don't feel like they have top-end standout teams. I think this does move Minnesota ahead of Philadelphia in my eyes. That's a little bit of a better team. New Orleans is right around there. I'm kind of on the fence with them because Philadelphia has been very good in the running game, like you mentioned. Their receiving game has been far better than they've had in the past years. I've been impressed with them this year, and we saw a big Torrey Smith game this past week, where if they can get him going too, that's even better for them. And their defense has been very good as well. So I still have them among the top 3 in the NFC. I think they're better than Seattle. I think they're better than Atlanta. I'm looking through these other teams. I think they're better than Carolina. They just beat the Rams. I think they can even do that with Nick Foles, even though it'll be tougher. It's just that Philly, Minnesota, and New Orleans, they're at the top. I think they do have an opportunity to still make it to the Super Bowl potentially.
Yeah, and especially, Zach, if they do end up hanging on to home field advantage throughout the playoffs. I mean, that's the key here. I mean, if this team was like the third or the 4th seed, or even the 2 seed, and they had to go to Minnesota for the championship game, that's obviously a bigger fight. But if they get home field advantage, okay, and can play one of those teams, Minnesota or the Saints, in Philly, that's a big advantage for them. I mean, those 2 teams are indoor teams. They both play indoors. I know Minnesota is a cold climate city, but they play in a dome. So I think it's the Eagles' advantage that they get that home field advantage and bring those teams outside. And the Eagles have won 8 straight home games. So they have a really good home field advantage going on right now. So that's obviously a key as well. So I've heard mixed emotions the last, 2 days here from, friends and family, and then obviously the national media and whatnot. And there are people that think the season's over. They don't stand a chance. They aren't even going to win another game. To people saying, like Sal Palantonio, who was just on a local Philly radio station, ESPN guy who has had Philly ties for a long time, he says that the Eagles, he said, I don't know what the result is going to be, but the NFC Championship game will be in Philadelphia this year. So he's a believer. So we'll see what happens. And it's going to be interesting. And as fans, and as a fan, I'm excited to see how things are going to pan out. And I think Foles is definitely a guy that can do that. So tough blow for the Eagles, like you said, man. But, Wentz will be back and they'll be, they'll be ready to rock, and he'll be ready to rock next year.
And looking through the NFC teams, every single one has some form of a weakness. And this is the first time we've really seen that with Philly, that kind of drops them down among the other teams. They were just, with Wentz, I feel like they were just so far ahead of everyone else in the NFC.
Agreed. And think about this too, Zach. Last thing I'll say about the Eagles is this team, has the best record in football. And still, the amount of injuries this team has had, not even just Carson Wentz. I mean, you're talking about Darren Sproles. You're talking about a future Hall of Famer left tackle Jason Peters. You're talking about your starting middle linebacker Jordan Hicks. You're talking about your special teams captain in Chris Maragos goes down. I mean, they have lost a lot of key players on this team, and yet have still found a way to do it. So we'll see if this one is something they can get over, or if it's just going to be too big of a loss. But imagine how good this team was if those guys weren't even injured. I mean, good night, how good this team could have been. But injuries are part of the game, and you move on.
Yeah, we'll see how they deal with that. And like we said, they have those 3 games coming up to make adjustments.
That's a great point too. That's a fantastic point by you, that he gets those 3 games to figure things out. It's not like the playoffs start this week. That's a great point.
Yeah, and it's not like they're fighting for the playoffs either, like a team like the Green Bay Packers dealing with a quarterback injury. So right. The Eagles have somewhat of an advantage there, and I'll be curious to see how they respond. That's one of the games I'm actually very interested to watch this weekend, when the Eagles play the Giants, even though the Giants have not been good, and I feel like I've watched them too many times. It'll still be interesting to see how the Eagles make those adjustments and how they look in their first game without Wentz.
For sure.
And that's where we're going next, to the Giants, to the Cowboys game. I'm at this stage, I can't get that hyped up about the Cowboys. I feel like they're just waddling back and forth around the playoffs, and I ultimately don't see them making the playoffs right now. I'm kind of disappointed with this season, everything that's going on with Ezekiel Elliott getting suspended, with Dak Prescott being very up and down, especially without Zeke there, that he's been disappointing. I'm not getting too hyped up about this game. They were down early, 10-3 against the Giants, before they got a long touchdown to Dez Bryant just before halftime. And then it was all Cowboys from that point on. After it was 10-3, they ended up scoring the next 27 points there to finish with a 30-10 win. I'm not having any major takeaways here. It was good to see Dak Prescott threw 3 touchdowns without any interceptions. Like I said, with the Dez Bryant touchdown, that looked good. Although outside of that, he didn't really do much else at all. Rod Smith had a monster game in the passing game there from the running back position, where he had 113 yards and a touchdown. I just don't think that's something the Cowboys can rely on. I think that's something they were more so taking advantage of, an injured and bad Giants defense, that some of that was open. And I'm not getting much from beating a poor team like this. And I really didn't like seeing the start where they weren't looking that good. The Giants were ahead, and they weren't pulling away until the second half there, where they shut them out.
I mean, they didn't even pull away, Zach, till the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about that. I mean, this team didn't pull away till about 7 minutes to go in the game, where it was just touchdown after touchdown after touchdown that really blew the game open. I mean, this was a 10-10 game with 8 minutes to go in the game. I mean, if you're a Cowboys fan like you are, like you said, I mean, you can't be confident. Yeah, you get the win, but I mean, you need to see a little bit more, especially against a struggling Giants team who has been probably the biggest clusterfuck of the NFL season so far. But look, they win the game, and that's what it's all about. It's, you don't ask how much they win by, or unless you bet on the game, but they won, and that's all that matters. And look, it sets up another. I mean, they've kind of been in must-win territory for what seems like, I guess, probably 3 weeks now, I guess you could say. So it sets up another, must win this weekend. They travel out and play Sunday Night Football against Oakland, who is another team that's just seems to have thrown in the towel. So Cowboys, their schedule sets up pretty nice. They obviously need some teams in front of them to lose, the Lions and the Packers being those teams, and they need to keep winning. So, and it would be interesting if they did get into the playoffs with kind of a fresh Zeke Elliott, and they've gotten Sean Lee back, and he had an interception on Sunday. They would be an interesting team in the playoffs. But
the problem with them, you mentioned the Packers and the Lions. Those are the teams that they're tied with. If they move ahead of them, they're still not in the playoffs. They've still got the Seahawks and the Falcons ahead of them in the wild card position, which is why I feel a lot worse about this situation right now.
Sure. No, I hear you. And they kind of dug themselves too big of a hole. And I agree. I definitely think they probably will come up short. So, it is what it is for Dallas. Tough season for the Cowboys after such a nice year last year.
Right. Definitely a drop off. My biggest hope is they can pick up someone with that higher pick now that'll be close to the late teens, mid-teens, depending on how they end up finishing. That'll be a little bit of a better pick. They can add something to their team and come back and rebound next year, depending on, because the Eagles are in a tough situation where Carson Wentz is likely to miss the beginning of next year at least, that it could be a 12-month injury, which would, I mean, right now we just finished week 14. So worst case scenario, he could be coming back midway through the season or just after that. So the Cowboys could set themselves up well for next year. I feel like this is kind of a wasted season with how it's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
We'll move from there to one of the other teams I just mentioned that's battling right around the wild card there. Seattle Seahawks took a loss here against Jacksonville, which I was surprised by. I thought Seattle would be able to win this one. Jacksonville was actually up by 13 in the fourth quarter. They were up 30-17 before Russell Wilson had a pass to Tyler Lockett, getting them back game, and they weren't able to much better than he has, especially last year when he was really struggling. Blake Bortles has been quite solid throughout this year. It is interesting to see Seattle, even in the loss, they seem to have found a more legitimate running game than what they've had. Mike Davis had 15 carries, 66 yards, averaged a little over 4 yards per carry. They've really needed that to be able to make any kind of run to solidify their spot in the playoffs and try and fight for their division title this year. So on a positive note for them, they did have a little more in the running game. They had a touchdown from each of their top three receivers, Tyler Lockett, Doug Baldwin, and Paul Richardson. But on the Jaguars side, Leonard Fournette with a big game, 101 yards and a touchdown. And then they got some good contribution from two rookie receivers, with Keelan Cole having 99 yards and a touchdown. This is his second straight week, catching all three of his targets. He's been very efficient the last 2 weeks. And then D.D. Westbrook coming up with 81 yards and a touchdown for them, which is huge, and what ultimately put them ahead in this game.
Yeah, when I was, obviously this game was going on when the Eagles game was going on, so I was just seeing the game break highlights during the Eagles game. And at the time, yeah, look, I was surprised. And then later that night when I, watched the highlights over again, I have a weird fetish with doing that. Sunday nights, I go through and hop on YouTube. And the NFL page does a really good job of putting like 7 to 9 minute highlight videos together of every game that day, which is really cool. Which if I don't see them, I like to go back and look at them. And when I was rewatching the highlights that night of this game, all I could think about was going back to the Eagles Seahawks game from 2 weeks ago. Remember when Wentz missed a couple big plays down the field that if he makes better throws, they're probably touchdowns, long touchdowns. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bortles and the Jaguars didn't miss on those this week. They connected on those deep plays, and you saw what happened. Big touchdowns, big shot plays down the field that banged up secondary for the Seahawks got exposed. And I think teams, as we go forward, and look, they play the Rams this week. The Rams are a big team at taking shots down the field, and I think the Rams could really continue to expose the Seahawks secondary and take shots down the field. And the Seahawks, this is the trouble that they get into with, I think, the injuries in the secondary, like I said, caught up with them. And the fact that if Russell Wilson doesn't play a high-efficiency game, they're going to lose. Does he throw 3 touchdowns? Yes, that's great. But he also throws 3 interceptions. I mean, you can't do that, especially on the road. And, you see what happens when he kind of has a slip-up game. They ultimately lose the game. So Seahawks, obviously the national spotlight and the national media likes to kind of pump them up a little bit just because they've been a mainstay in the playoffs in the NFL for, 5 to 6 years here now. But I'm not as sold on them as a lot of people are. This week, like I said, they play the Rams. That's no given victory. I mean, the Rams almost beat them. Probably should have beat them in the first matchup. Granted, it's in Seattle, but the Seahawks still have to get into the playoffs here. And as it sits right now, man, they're on the outside looking in. As far as the Jaguars, you have to be impressed with them. I mean, they are the number one rushing team in the league. That defense is fantastic. I mean, that is probably one of the better young defenses in the league with their cornerbacks. Obviously, Jalen Ramsey has become one of the better shutdown corners in the National Football League. The front, when they added Calais Campbell, and the linebacking core has been solid all year as well. So, Blake Bortles, the thing is, if Bortles doesn't turn the ball over, this team seems to win. So, I mean, if Bortles can just get his head out of his ass for the next month, I truly believe this team could beat New England or beat Pittsburgh. They already beat Pittsburgh this year, remember? They forced 5 interceptions off of Ben Roethlisberger. So I believe this Jacksonville team really can make some damage and put a little wrench into the AFC playoffs. They took the division lead over the Titans. They're now the 3 seed. So, I mean, they're sitting pretty right now, Zach.
I'm in agreement with you. That defense has been good. Bortles, like I mentioned, he's been good the last month. When it comes to, he hasn't been amazing. He hasn't put up all pro numbers or anything like that. But he's reduced the turnovers. He's kept them down. He's made plays when he needs to. He's been very efficient, and that's what they need with such a stud running game that they have right there. That this team could pull an upset or two there in the playoffs.
For sure. I mean, if they hang on to that 3 seed and they get a home playoff game against one of those lower level AFC teams that are, right around 500, that shouldn't be any trouble. And then, you see how far you can go. And I think they can, like I said, they can definitely make some noise in the playoffs. Jacksonville is a team that going forward, I am really intrigued to watch the rest of the year.
Yeah, I definitely want to see them play. That's a team I haven't watched play at all this year, incredibly, as they've had such a good season here. So I'll definitely be looking out for them. Hopefully I get to see them before the playoffs start to see what they actually look like live. But yeah, that's one team that I think it's more so because they've been bad the last couple of years that I just haven't tuned in at all to be able to see them play. But like you mentioned, that Rams-Seahawks game is another one coming up. It's going to be a big one, battle for the top of the division there within one game of each other. So that goes along with that Chargers-Chiefs game here with another battle for the top of the division coming up this week. So those will be 2 exciting games to watch for sure. We'll move from there to one of the highest scoring games of the weekend. Pittsburgh pulling out a 1-point victory against the Baltimore Ravens, 39-38. This was a wild back and forth game. Steelers got up 14-0 right away with 2 Le'Veon Bell touchdowns, and then they let the Ravens take the lead. The Ravens got up at one point. It was 31-20. Then the Steelers started chipping away at the lead. They couldn't quite take the lead until 42 seconds left. They had a Chris Boswell field goal to end up winning. They were able to finish it after that. Some crazy stats specifically on the Steelers side in this game. But the Ravens also put up some big stats here too. But 66 passing attempts by Ben Roethlisberger. You just don't hear of that at all, that throwing that many times in one game. Le'Veon Bell had 2 touchdowns on the ground. He had 48 yards rushing. He also contributed 77 yards and a touchdown through the air. Antonio Brown, 11 catches. He had an absurd 18 targets. He had 213 yards receiving. Jesse James from the tight end spot, he had 10 catches, 97 yards. Like I mentioned with Le'Veon Bell's stats, he had 9 catches. Those 3 just putting up crazy numbers there. On the Ravens side, not as much when it came to the receiving game. Mike Wallace had 72 yards against his former team. Chris Moore had a nice touchdown catch there. He had 48 yards and a touchdown overall. And then they really wrote an impressive game from Alex Collins. The Steelers just could not stop him on the ground. He averaged almost 7 yards a carry, went for 120 yards, scored a touchdown there on the ground, and then also added 46 yards receiving on just 2 catches. Alex Collins looked really good this game, but ultimately the Steelers were able to win there by 1 point within the last minute.
Yeah, that's become a habit with the Steelers, hasn't it, Zach, where they like to win on these walk-off field goals by Chris Boswell, who has been fantastic as well for them this year. I mean, you think back at some of these games that they've played where they had a comeback on the road a month ago against the Colts, win on a walk-off field goal. At home against the Packers, they had a comeback and win on a walk-off field goal. Last week, or 2 weeks ago now, I guess you should say, against the Bengals, they're down 17 points. They come back, win on a walk-off field goal. And then the game we're talking about right now where they have to come back and win on a walk-off field goal. Look, I like the Steelers, but, I mean, guys, like, they can't keep making this a habit, especially as we're getting into the nitty-gritty here and you're getting into the playoffs. I mean, look, your team has a lot of firepower. I get that. Mm-hmm. But you can't keep, especially when you get facing some of these good teams, New England and Jacksonville and teams like that. I mean, you get down 17 points to those teams, you're not coming back. So Pittsburgh's a fascinating team to me because they have so much firepower, yet week in and week out they do things and let teams hang around. You just scratch your head and say, I mean, how? Defensively, they've really struggled lately. I mean, Shazier going down, I think, is a huge loss for this team. And Joe Hayden has been out, and that's been a big problem, too, in the passing game. So looks like they might get Hayden back this weekend. He's going to practice for the first time in some time. So but it'd be interesting to see what happens there. The Ravens, they dropped the ball in this one. I mean, really. This game was theirs. I mean, they did a great job at battling back on the road at Heinz Field, come back from an early deficit, take a nice lead. And then they looked like they could have cared less with about 5 minutes to go. The play calling and the execution was just atrocious. I watched that whole game start to finish because it was such a good game. I couldn't get enough of it. The possession before the Steelers scored the touchdown to make it a one-possession game. I mean, I think there was something like 3 minutes left or 4 minutes left. I mean, they're out there like chucking the ball around with Flacco like he's, like they're the Steelers. Like they have Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown. I mean, like Alex Collins, like you said, was gashing them. I don't even think he was on the field. Like, you wonder sometimes with these coaches, man, I mean, what the hell they're thinking. And they let the Steelers get the ball back, hang around. Ultimately, you leave Pittsburgh with a loss. So that one, I think, John Harbaugh is really kicking himself for that game.
Yeah, he has to be, especially with their team fighting for a playoff spot here.
Yep.
This drops them to 7-6 and puts them right in line with quite a few tough teams right there. Specifically, the loser of the division between the Chargers and the Chiefs. Either one of those is a top team that could overtake this Ravens team for the final playoff spot. They're all sitting there with the exact same record. Now, the Ravens do have an advantage in that for the playoffs, where this coming week, the Ravens play the 0-win Browns, while the Chiefs and the Chargers play each other. So one of them is going to win and keep Baltimore there in the playoff hunt, in the wild card position, unless somehow they lose to Cleveland this coming week.
They actually have a very they actually have a very easy schedule. Yeah. The remaining 3 games, Zach, as we close things out. At the Browns, at home against the Colts, and at home against the Bengals. I mean, 3 teams that are just very poor this year. So, I think if you're a Ravens fan or if you're the Ravens themselves, I mean, you should sweep those 3 games and get into the playoffs. But obviously, it's the NFL. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. That's both divisions have a tight race there for the final playoff spots here coming into the final 3 games for each of the teams. And we'll move from that game into the team the Steelers are playing this coming week, the New England Patriots, losing without Rob Gronkowski against a Miami Dolphins team who has looked very up and down throughout this season. This was actually the first time I've watched the Dolphins play this year. I was impressed with their defense. They made it very difficult, especially their corners really shutting down the receivers until late. Brandon Cooks didn't do anything until he had a long reception late in the fourth quarter, a 38-yard catch. That was his only catch of the game. They were not giving up much at all there. And Brady struggled this game. He threw for 1 touchdown. He did throw 2 interceptions. While on the other side, Jay Cutler threw 3 touchdowns, just kind of handled his way through this Patriots defense who's struggled throughout the year. And also what hurt the Patriots was they didn't get much of anything on the ground. They gave 5 rushes to both Dion Lewis and Rex Burkhead. That totaled 25 yards. So not much of anything from either of those guys. And on the other side, the Dolphins dominated with Kenyon Drake. He had 25 carries. He had 114 yards. He looked fantastic. He had a great spin move at the line of scrimmage. The one carry took off for a big gain to the right side. And then he also led them in receiving with 5 catches for 79 yards. I was very impressed with him. And then they have Jarvis Landry, who's just so consistent. He had 8 catches, 46 yards, and 2 touchdowns for them. And they actually had a bigger lead than what the final score shows. They were up 27-10 at one point before the Patriots had a touchdown and a field goal in the fourth quarter to make it a little bit closer, a little more respectable, and give them a chance to win it. But really, this Miami team, they looked good, and they held that lead for almost the entire game.
Yeah, look, they did. And that was the worst I've seen New England play since probably the first half of the Super Bowl last year. And, I'm never going to doubt him. You're stupid if you do. But it definitely makes you raise an eyebrow the last few games with Tom Brady. Look, he's 40 years old. He says he feels great. He says he feels better than he did when he came into the league. But he's gotten hit a lot this year. That offensive line is kind of leaky. He's thrown an interception in 3 straight games. The last 2 weeks, you look what he did this week until he threw a touchdown late. He only threw 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. And then what he did last week against the Bills, what did he throw? No touchdowns and 1 interception. Now, the Patriots won, obviously, because their ground game was so dynamic. But, I've scratched my head a little bit with Brady. Now I'm sure he'll come out and throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Steelers because that's just what he does. But until I see it, I'm a little concerned. And but like I said, you never doubt Belichick and you never doubt Brady. I'm sure they'll get it straightened out, kind of like they did with this defense a little bit. They had a lot of injuries last night, and that game last night, Zach, really didn't mean a whole lot. Definitely meant a lot more to the Dolphins than it did to the Patriots because, look, if the Patriots win Sunday against the Steelers, you got home field throughout the playoffs. That's what this game is for. It's for home field advantage throughout the playoffs. The loser probably going to be the number 2 seed, you would think. So the Dolphins, look, Kenyon Drake, like you said, obviously showed me something. I spot started him in one of my one of my leagues that I needed to win that game to get into the playoffs. You helped me out a little bit with that decision, which I appreciate. But yeah, and Jay Cutler, that was the Jay Cutler that they kind of thought they were going to get. That was the Jay Cutler that they were expecting to kind of have. Sit back there, rip it, make some good throws, not turn the ball over, and this team could compete. But that was, when the best game of your quarterback's season by far is in week 14. I mean, that's an issue. So
a little late.
Patriots, I'm sure will be fine, and the Dolphins, they've been average for so long. So
Yeah, those are all the important games we're getting through. I just have a couple comments on some of the games we will skip through here at the end. The first one actually deals with a team that just got shut out, but shout out to Josh McCown. He took a terrible Jets team and made them decent. They were 5-7 with him until they lost 23-0 this past week. Unfortunately, he just had a season-ending injury. He's bounced all around the league. He's hung around for what seems like forever. He's played on 8 different teams in his NFL career. But he played well this season. He threw for just under 3,000 yards, 2,926. He threw 18 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He lost his number 1 receiver in the preseason, Quincy Enunwa. They've been playing with a guy. Their number 1 receiver has been Jermaine Kearse, who they traded for just before the season even started. And then they've got Robbie Anderson, who's done some good things. But Josh McCown playing with what seems like almost an empty roster, had one of his best seasons of his career. Unfortunately, it just ended with an injury he sustained in this game. But huge respect for his season this year.
Yeah, and if you saw his post-game press conference, I mean, he got pretty emotional and because look, he's an older guy. Like you said, he's been in the league for some time, and he's not sure if he's going to play again. And he did have such a nice year on such a poor team, and props to him and to the guys in that locker room. The Jets have had a much better season than you or I or a lot of other people.
I said they'd win 0 games.
Yeah, right. And I know a few other people probably thought that too. So, definitely a tip of your hat to him and kind of what he's done. So, definitely one of the good guys in the league for sure.
Yeah, definitely there. He's just bounced around the league. He's been a backup all kinds of different places. He's gotten some chances to start. So good to see that and he's 38 years old and still having success. So very impressive there. We also barely will touch on the Bills won 13-7 in overtime. They stay in the playoff hunt in a crazy game that just the snow falling everywhere. I'm sure you've seen video of it by this point, and anything you have from that game to take away, Ryan?
The only thing I'll say is, well, 2 things quickly. The Colts got hosed. Okay, they went for 2, which they succeeded with, and the official called pass interference on a Colts wide receiver who was clearly within the rules, blocking within a yard of the line of scrimmage, and it gets taken off the board. They have to kick the extra point, and they go to overtime. It's like, if I'm an official and I'm calling a game in a fucking blizzard, it's just an absolute shit show, I'm not making that call. 1, it's the wrong call, and 2, I want to get the hell out of there and get in and get a fucking warm shower, take a shot of whiskey, and have some hot chocolate. That's what I want to do. The last thing about this game quickly, LaShawn McCoy, is he the best snow football player we've ever seen? I mean, look at what he did on Sunday in that blizzard. He has a game-winning touchdown, rushes over 100 yards. And then when he did a few years back when he played with the Eagles against Detroit, where he rushed over for 200 yards. It's crazy. If every other player seems to slip and slide, he's still able to make those cuts and be shifty the way he is. So I tip my hat to Shady McCoy because he is really, really good in the snow.
Yeah, he's great throughout the year for sure. And the Bills really hold their own destiny.
They do.
They're sitting at 7-6. 2 of their last 3 games are against Miami Dolphins that we talked about earlier. They've been very up and down, kind of unpredictable. So if they can pull out both those wins, they should make the playoffs. I really don't see it happening. I don't see them making the playoffs there at all this year. I believe the third game's the Patriots. I don't have it in front of me, but I know the third game I didn't see them winning at all.
Okay, yeah, I mean they're the last spot in the playoffs right now. They are the 6th seed if I remember correctly. So, like you said, they do hold their own destiny. I can't see them kind of beating them twice, the Dolphins twice, and then the other game who, like you said, you think is the Patriots. So, yeah, it is what it is. Good luck. Yep. They're not going far. We'll put it that way. Even if they do get in.
they're currently at their record. They're sitting in a tie for the last playoff position with the Ravens and the Chargers. And then the Raiders and Dolphins are right behind them there. And it's going to be tough. Like we said, with Baltimore having an easy schedule, the Chargers hot. The Chiefs could also factor into that. If the Chargers win, then the Chiefs drop down to that spot. But that's going to be a tight race here finishing out. So we'll go to two more games with young quarterbacks winning. Mitch Trubisky led the Bears to a 33-7 win over the Bengals. The 49ers win their second straight game with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, 26-16 over Houston. And then the final game we haven't really touched on, Tennessee loses 12-7 for a team that's likely going to make the playoffs against an Arizona team with their backup quarterback playing. That's not a game that they want to drop. But anything you have to say about either of those three games?
Yeah, look, the Titans are who kind of we thought they were. I mean, you cannot lose that game to Arizona. Like, I'm sorry. Like, you can't. And now you're screwed because you have to play catch-up on Jacksonville. You could have had a home playoff game. Now you might not get that. So they really did themselves a pretty big disservice. Garoppolo continues to look pretty sharp, albeit against another inferior opponent, but still. The quarterback was obviously one of the missing pieces there. It looks like that San Francisco's found that. And then the last game that you mentioned, Zach, was what again?
Chicago and Cincinnati.
Chicago. Oh, yeah. I have absolutely nothing to say about that game. Only if Marvin Lewis is not fired at the end of this year, I am personally, and you like cross-country trips, you and I are going to go on a cross-country trip this summer to talk to all 32 teams and say, I want to be your head coach. Because if Marvin Lewis can still hold a job with the lack of success that he's had in Cincinnati for such a long period of time, there's no reason why you and I should not be a head coach in the NFL. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's how ridiculous this situation in Cincinnati is. The fact that he's still the head coach is perplexing. He's got to be gone. He's got to be fired.
And one quick note in that game, A.J. McCarron got a little action. He completed 4 for 8 passes there. It'll be interesting to see if he's someone that's traded. He seems to be a name that comes up every single offseason that some teams are inquiring. I know it was the Broncos this past year. The Browns have before. So we'll see if anything happens with him and if he gets any action, if they continue being this terrible. But I don't know. I don't know if they want a PR nightmare like the Giants had there, benching their longtime starter for an unknown. But at least it's not Geno Smith.
Yeah, they got that going for them.
So congratulations on being better than the Giants, in a better situation than the Giants. That's all you got going right now, Cincinnati.
That's awesome.
Well, that wraps up our NFL recap from the past week. We covered all the major games I had down for this upcoming week, with the Patriots-Steelers being a big game, Rams-Seahawks within their division, the other big divisional matchup with Chiefs and Chargers, then the Eagles-Giants to see how the Eagles do with Nick Foles at quarterback, Packers play the Panthers, and then 2 lesser concerning games, teams on the edge of the playoffs, but Buffalo versus Miami and then Dallas versus Oakland Raiders that could factor into playoff positioning. I'm not as concerned about those games, even though I'm a Cowboys fan. I'll still probably watch the Cowboys game if it's on around here.
Sure.
But those other 5 games are definitely ones to watch. They all have significant playoff implications tied up in what happens during those games.
Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely right, man. And, this is the time of the year you live for. I mean, where all these games have playoff implications, and that there was a lot last week, and there is a lot again this week. So some teams can, clinch first-round buys, clinch divisions. So it's obviously going to continue to be exciting.
Thank you so much for listening to the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. We really appreciate it. We've changed some things up based on some of the feedback we've received, so we'd love to continue hearing your feedback. As we continue to build this platform with our podcast, it's very helpful to us if you can share it with the people you know that you think would be interested. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and have a great week.